We are back, and I'm very excited to be back. Sotirios, the science episode was incredible. The size and scale of the research was incredible, and what valuable information for us to have as we're trying to have difficult conversations around nitrogen and how we should think about management. But I get to do the introduction to our management episode, so I have to remove the cover off my script. You want me to read the part that says open up part two?
You don't read anything. You just do
this is a revelation about myself. I'm Sean Bloomgren, and I take great pride in the length of my rat tail on the back of my head. It's currently 2 feet long and braided.
Things you never knew, right?
Yeah. You need to be prepared.
Correct. I feel like you might have gotten an opportunity to read that ahead of time there.
I skipped that part.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
So you can't see it because you guys are facing each other.
I tuck it into my... Fabrizio actually braids it for me because I've never figured out the hand motion behind my head, so...
Well, we're back to talk nitrogen. Had a really good episode talking about some of the science behind your learnings with old hybrids, new hybrids, just nitrogen in general. I'm thinking about how we could potentially utilize this. You have a lot of learnings around nitrogen uptake, the allocation of nitrogen within the plant, the impact on the grain yield. But I wanted to start because there's so many different ways you can utilize that information, right? And so I wanted to start before we even get into the nitrogen part. How do you think your research will benefit breeders? We learn so much about the allocation and just some of the differences in nitrogen uptake and efficiency, old hybrids, new hybrids. How do you see that impacting breeders as we move forward?
Yeah. So there are lots of new information coming out of the project. Breeders were not aware. Every time we talk about a trait, grain nitrogen concentration, harvest index, or canopy, or radiation use efficiency, etc., what I realize, this is new for breeders. They never thought about it. They didn't select for higher use efficiency, etc., was going after the yield. And going with that, they changed many different parts within the plan. For them, I realize it's very beneficial to understand what they have done to the maize plant. They go for one target and they do lots of changes without knowing. So learning of what they have done, then they start thinking how we can put more of this information into the breeding equation and put it as a selection target. I think they learn a lot, and it's the discussion and the interaction with the breeders we have through the project. It's really great. I learn a ton as well from the breeders.
I always learn when I talk for breeders. I've always said I think breeders are the smartest people on earth. They got to know about everything.
I changed the way that I run experiments because of breeders. Oh yeah, they are the best. When it comes to field experimentation, are the best. Crop physiologists are not.
Well, it's interesting to think about. I'm thinking through my 20-year timeline in the industry. And I was thinking, when you say they've bred for one factor, and that one factor being yield, I think about if you think about any major ag company, right, regardless of who it is, you've seen this ebb and flow where sometimes like yield at all cost shows up in the field, right? Like we're selecting for yield and maybe we give up other plant characteristics. We struggle with either disease protection or standability or whatever. It's interesting to me thinking through what I feel like has been probably the last 8 to 10 years. It seems like plant breeders have been able to continue to increase yield, maybe even increase the delta of the increase in yield. But also it seems like we're experiencing higher disease tolerance, better standability. I mean, just across the board, it's impressive to me because it seems like there was periods of time where it was like we'd see this, what felt like a big jump in yield, but maybe sacrifice some of those other plant characteristics.
Yeah. That's true. And when I say they go after yield, that's the main target. Of course, they have secondary and 3, 4, 5 selection criteria like stability and all sorts of things. That's also part of the breeding objectives.
Yeah.
Andrew and I have gotten to do some cool things where we've gotten, I would say, glimpses into some of the technology that's being used. I think just the rate of technology gain then handed to these breeders is helping make, still keep yield at the forefront, but then also being able to monitor all of these other attributes that are so critical. It makes me think about the ability to ultimately then, you talk about all the use efficiencies, and I hadn't even thought about like radiation use efficiency, right? So where we grow corn, Michigan along the UP, right? We're going to deal with a lot more clouds, a lot more humidity, probably less radiation. You go to the south, you're probably going to significantly increase that. Some of those things may ultimately be pretty important as we move forward. But I don't mean to go down a...
No, I think it's good because I wanted to say, in the first episode, you made the comment, we've changed some things in the plant, but you don't think about what the other impact on other things within the plant is. So when we're having this conversation and you made the comment breeders weren't intentionally trying to do this, I immediately thought of all the conversations I've had with breeders as we sit down and try and think about what we need for products in the next 1 to 3 years, right? It's heat stress, drought stress, yield, crown rot, tar spot tolerance, southern rust, but you don't think about, you change this stuff and focus on that. What's the impact on all these other things? And so a study like this really probably opens your eyes to what we've done over the last 40 years and how we've impacted some of these things.
Exactly. One portion of the study that we talked in the previous episodes, it was about diseases. We had hybrids with fungicide and hybrids with diseases, but not fungicide, and different year of release. It was amazing.
You see a big difference in disease tolerance?
I saw the genetic gain. It was keep going up, no matter with the diseases. So the tolerance went up by a lot. And the severity, indicators, everything, it was all great. So there are multiple changes that happen in the maize plant that are remarkable. And there is no a single one to get all the glory. There are many, and all of them, they go back to yield. The breeding equation, if I write it down with mathematical forms and include the crop physiology part, I will need from here all the way to the door.
We talked about this, so I guess as we kind of dive into the conversation, you explained to us the concept of the harvest index and how we measure that. And we kind of answered this, but talk about what you think is the maximum harvest index that a grower and breeder could be striving for.
In experimental plots, we have measured up to 0.7, 0.71 at a single plot. Now, we have not measured that in a full field scale. To me,
0.7, huh?
0.7. We have measured that.
What do you think the impact of the environment is on that? Or how does even the environment impact that?
It is more of the management that you can go there, because the number one factor you can change and play with the harvest index is the plant density.
Okay.
That's what I was just thinking, because, you watch a guy whose row shutoffs don't work, and all of a sudden you've got a plant with a 3-foot gap, and you've got 4 ears that are all massive. So you could almost cheat the scale.
You can get high harvest index, but what you really want to get is high harvest index and high biomass production. And if you achieve both, you get super high yield. That's the challenge.
Explain that.
Well, I was going to say, maybe a better question to ask than what's the most harvest index we could accomplish would be, do you have a hypothesis on what is the optimum harvest index?
When it comes to the optimum, there is no a single number. The optimum depends on environmental conditions and management settings. There is no optimum. Usually the higher, the better you can get with the harvest index.
Yeah.
And I will throw out a 3-word equation. Yield equals harvest index times biomass. Over the last years, 30% of the yield increase is because of the harvest index, and 70% because of the biomass increase. Both contributed.
So if that's the case, I'm thinking about how nitrogen could impact just vegetative growth. You know, it doesn't always translate to yield, right? Bigger plants. So I'm just thinking, is that right? Am I thinking about that correctly?
You think very correctly. I would like to see...
About that one question.
I would like to see the corn plants take up the nitrogen from the soil as fast as they can and as much as they can. That will be the best. Usually we have now 50-60% of the total nitrogen is done by R1. Get it more. Get as much as you can. It's a good thing. Take it from the soil, store it in your tissues, let it be used later on.
So if I'm a grower and, you know, if harvest index alone isn't something we should focus on for high yields, it's really harvest index and biomass. What would you say a grower should focus on if they're trying to shoot for high yields in terms of biomass, above ground biomass, or even, I mean, a grower's not going to go out and look at harvest index, but they will look at an ear and they can look at the biomass of the plants. What's something good to focus on if you're a grower?
If I was a grower, I would try to put the pieces together at the same time. Right planting date, really uniform planting, so I want perfect uniform emergence, non-limited nitrogen conditions, and then not kind of near optimum soil moisture, and the remaining is gonna come. It's not like increase plant population by 4K. In this, it's not going to be a single solution to get you to the really high yields.
Yeah.
You need to think the system and make the right decisions in terms of selection of hybrid, selection of nitrogen application rate, when you put that, and to think beyond nitrogen, to think the whole nutrients concept there. And ensure the environment where you grow the corn, it's really great condition in terms of hydrology, tile drainage, or if there is limited by water, to consider supplementary irrigation, depending on where they are. It's a combo.
What's your thoughts on the impact of vegetative growth or the harvest index biomass above ground on a V8 to V10 applied nitrogen during prime uptake versus, you know, spring or fall applied?
I guess if a grower applies nitrogen at V8 and V10, and this nitrogen is available the day after to the plant, and it doesn't limit nitrogen uptake, perfectly fine and very happy, because it's going to be the perfect timing. So question is, you apply today, can you take it tomorrow? Or you have to wait a couple of days?
Yeah. Well, I guess I was thinking too, because I know I've had conversations and just thought about the impact. You know, you side dress some liquid nitrogen at that V8 to V10, and you often see a greening effect, right? Or just some quick growth in that corn plant. And I'm just thinking about does maybe that impact vegetative growth or biomass when you're applying during prime uptake with immediately available, depending on the weather source?
Yeah. The amount that the plant is going to take up is going to be determined by the hybrid, the plant population, and radiation. The plant doesn't care if the nitrogen was applied yesterday, week before, or 5 years ago. And doesn't care about the source. All it cares is, I need food, I need to take it, now I need it. Don't care who brought the food here.
Yeah.
This is why I feel like it's really challenging, right? Because we know nutrient uptake curves. And so then we know, well, theoretically, there's ways we can impact the corn plant, but the significant variable is, can we apply whatever it is, in this case, nitrogen, in a form that's going to be cooperative with Mother Nature and that uptake curve. And it's interesting, I run into people who will say, well, I got burned really bad, right? So it made sense to me to side dress. So I side dressed. And if they've had an excruciatingly bad experience, it's like never again, right? But then the flip side is true. You have some people who have done it and have had just a monumentally successful experiment, and then they think you're crazy if you're not doing it that way, right? So what you're saying makes perfect sense. If the plant's hungry and there's food, it doesn't care who delivered the food, right?
Yeah.
But the flip side is true. Sometimes we rely on poor delivery mechanisms and they're not present. So it's the constant battle of how to do that. I mean, we were literally talking about this. I had a grower that we put together what just felt like an absolutely beautiful plan, kind of trying to chase maybe a higher end management style, kind of patting ourselves on the back. This is so awesome. 24 hours later, hail wipes the crop out. And you just get this sick feeling in the pit of your stomach. Like, gosh, I mean, just the best laid plan, right? And now you've got all this investment in nutrient laying there that may or may not still be there for some future date, but it just feels incredibly vulnerable. And then that individual has to say, okay, the theory wasn't wrong, but Mother Nature wasn't cooperative. Now we got to go back to the bases, right? So that's probably a good thing to scare everybody away from the conversation we're about to have. Let's talk about the idea of, we talked about nitrogen use efficiency in the scientific episode, and both from an ROI standpoint and frankly from like the concept of sustainability, right? All the conversations we're having in the Midwest about water quality and soil health and that sort of thing. Nitrogen use efficiency seems to be something we should all be paying attention to, and it seems like it should be a desire of ours to do that really well. So talk about how can growers improve their nitrogen use efficiency?
I have a very simple answer for this.
Perfect. Few things are simple.
Increase the yield.
Huh.
Everything is related to the yield. If you see the components of the nitrogen use efficiency, everything is driven by yield.
What are those components?
Well, it is, if you go to the crop and uptake, the crop and uptake is the product of the biomass, and the biomass is the product of yield and the harvest index, stover and yield. And this is how everything is connected there.
I can picture a grower saying, well, then how do I increase yield?
Put on more nitrogen. And then it turns into a circle.
Exactly. This goes back to, there is no a single thing you can do to increase yield. You have to think the whole package. It's timing, it's amounts, it's the whole combo. That's the beauty.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a comment that I think Castellano made to us where we were talking about nitrogen management. And one of his comments was one of the best ways you can increase your nitrogen use efficiency is by balancing oxygen and moisture in the soil, right? And so he was pointing at your nitrogen use efficiency in a lot of instances will be higher where you have pattern tile because you are going to have a significantly higher balance of oxygen and moisture in the soil, increases plant efficiency, ultimately increases yield. So that's,
I agree with this. And I went with the yield because it's the main big player here. And if we start going down and say, okay, we need to close the canopy faster to intercept more light, and all this is going to eventually lead to more crop and uptake and less in the soil and goes to nitrogen use efficiency. Yeah. I was a straight shooter on this answer. I went directly to the source.
Well, we talked, you and I talked in my office one day, and I don't know if I'd use the term chastised me, but you kind of challenged me on that thinking that we have to be a little bit careful with the concept that reducing nitrogen is going to increase our nitrogen use efficiency, right? Because it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Just by simply applying less, I'm going to increase my efficiency. That may or may not happen, but in a lot of instances, that's not the answer, correct?
It's not the answer. We don't want to increase something and decrease something else. We want to increase the nitrogen use efficiency, but this to come from yield increase as well. What the farmer is going to do if maximize the nitrogen use efficiency and lose the yield? That's not what we want.
Thinking about that too, and you look at 2025, we weren't as wet across the Corn Belt, but definitely some parts. I mean, we had wet springs here in Central Iowa. 2026, much of the Corn Belt's wet. We still have dry spots. What do you think the nitrogen use efficiency is on a grower that split applied his nitrogen versus a grower that put all their nitrogen on in the fall?
My hypothesis, on average across many situations, the split applied is going to increase the nitrogen use efficiency. And the reason is because you are going to preserve some of the nitrogen in the soil rather than to go into the waterways or to the atmosphere.
Would you expect bigger plants, bigger vegetative growth as well?
I will expect heavier plants, more nitrogen uptake. Sometimes the size doesn't say a lot to me. I look the weight. I try to weight the plants rather than to be impressed with the size.
So you look at weight versus a visual size.
Yeah, and that's part of, if you think about like the nitrate test that they do for cattle feeders, that's part of the test that they do, and that is they weigh the biomass of the plant, and then they take a chlorophyll reading, right, to compare the two to get a nitrogen concentration.
It's kind of tricky. You see tall, beautiful corn, and then you see some smaller corn.
Yeah.
You never know what the scale is going to give you.
Well, it kind of reminds me of like chlorophyll. You can have densely packed chlorophyll, and you can also have chlorophyll that's more spread out, and this can impact the greenness and you explain the hybrid differences in the greenness, right? Chlorophyll concentration. It reminds me of, you might have a nice big plant, but the weight might not be as much as a smaller plant, right? Visually.
Well, and we've experienced that over the years, right? Like some of the most popular hybrids, some
like
years are unbelievably beautiful, and then some years it's like, my God, that thing looks ugly when you're driving down the road, but you ultimately you're harvesting for the yield, not the plant appearance. But for a long time, it was the darker green meant a healthier plant and better conversion. I don't know that that's always the case anymore, but when we talk about split applying nitrogen, we also have to understand that there's an impact when we apply nitrogen, right? There's a cost to our soil. So talk, if you would, about how does nitrogen suppress soil mineralization?
So this is a great question, and I will refer to Castellano to answer, to give you the whole science behind this. There is evidence that there is a suppression of soil organic carbon mineralization. There are publications there, and our group published one paper. I want to get this a little bit to beyond the soil organic carbon, because we need to think the system. And when we talk about nitrogen and mineralization, we must factor in the residue. Because at the end of the day, what the plant cares, the corn plant, is the net mineralization. And sometimes the fertilization, it can benefit the decomposition of the residue.
Yeah.
And this is going to...
Did I hear you right? That what the corn plant cares about is the net mineralization. Okay.
What is coming from the soil and what is taken back by the breakdown of residue. This is the net. This is what is available to the plant.
So when you said that, I immediately thought of the carbon to nitrogen ratio and us putting on nitrogen to supply those microbes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The lower the C/N ratio, the better, the less nitrogen you are going to take up from the soil. So back to the question.
Say that one more time.
The smaller the C/N ratio, the less amount of soil inorganic nitrogen the residues are going to take up to break.
Meaning immobilize what you've applied.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So more is going to be available for the plant.
Yep.
These two things are going in parallel. The soil is mineralizing. The residues require nitrogen to decompose. The lower the C/N ratio, the less nitrogen they are going to require. And this is good for the plant. Now, we need to time this everything perfectly and synchronize the supply with the demand. And this will go to another story, another discussion there.
Oh, I guess with that too, and we'll probably get into this with in our next episode. But when you mention that too, I think about we put so much nitrogen on, and part of that's to feed the system, right? But what's the impact? We have a lot of growers that have chopping heads, right? And breaking up residue can help it break down quicker if you have moisture and temperature, but it doesn't impact the carbon to nitrogen ratio, right? So just because you're chopping up that residue more, it really doesn't impact the carbon to nitrogen ratio. It just helps, if we do have moisture in the right conditions, it just helps that residue break down quicker. So what's your thoughts on that?
I agree. The smaller the pieces, think of this pen and think of this one here, and it's going to be full of soil microbes. The surface with the microbes is going to be surrounded. It's going to decompose faster. So chopping is going to help decomposition, but it may create other problems.
Yeah.
Like wind blowing around the residue.
Yeah.
All sorts of
little residue pieces in the trench when you're trying to get evenly spaced seed.
Yeah, we've observed quite a bit of that where I don't really know when chopping heads became popular, 10 years ago, probably roughly 10 years ago. It felt like, okay, we've solved a problem. At least that's what we thought. And now I feel like more often than not, I see problems with sized residue more than I do larger residue when it comes to clearing with the planter. And so you're constantly fighting the battle of I'm trading one thing for another. Exactly. The amount of times I've seen water or wind move residue and create a shockingly large area that the planter just can't do a good job in. And then when you talk about if I want to improve my nitrogen use efficiency, I improve my yield, well, oftentimes I'm decreasing that through some other thing. And I was thinking, we both spent some time at the Digital Ag Innovation Lab this morning, and when you go to their planter clinic, they talk extensively about your planter can only solve so many of your problems, right? The way you size your residue, the way you spread out your trash, the way you do your tillage all impacts that. So it's interesting to think about advising nitrogen through the lens of perfect nitrogen doesn't matter if you have these other compounding factors or you limit its ability. So it's good to think about, like Matt Dart always talks about, we have to think about how, the complete cycle. We can't think about anything in one piece. So
absolutely. And there are different pieces and cycles in this farm and that farm and different solutions within each of it.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of agriculture.
It seems like with our known sources today, some version of encapsulating and protecting urea that we can use some amount of in-season intuition around, right? Because I think the risk is you say, okay, I'm going to underfeed early and feed late, and that would open up risk that probably no grower wants to take, right? I don't want to have the risk of being underapplied. But if you think back to last year when you and I were scouting corn together in early August, before Southern Rust had the impact that it did, we were staring at probably the largest crop we'd ever seen, right? We had water, we had mineralization, we had huge kernel potential. I'm wondering if at that point we feel like we had applied the appropriate amount of nitrogen, but we knew we had this potentially massive crop, right? So our nitrogen use efficiency was going to go up. But in my mind, there's also this opportunity, should we be dosing some nitrogen to protect that late V and early R stages. The risk then, though, becomes a lot of our tools are kind of flawed when we're talking about mid-July and early August, because it's typically mid-80s. We don't traditionally get rain. When we do, oftentimes it comes heavy and fast. So it seems like we might be technologically limited, maybe more than agronomically limited at that point.
I will agree. We need more options. We have many and different targets. The more help we get from technology, the better. And the fastest we're going to get to the solutions.
I keep picturing those robots I've seen that I think I'm hoping to start working with here soon, but where you drop off one of those cargo containers in the end of a field.
Just keep running back and grabbing something.
It is. You got to keep 32% in there, but essentially this robot will go up and wide drop nitrogen all day. All it does is just drive. It's one row. It just drives up and down the row.
Every day?
Yeah.
like a Roomba.
But I mean, you take a field, it can do, I don't know how many acres it can do, but you picture an 80-acre field, maybe it takes it 2 to 3 days. But you just take a field.
And then it takes 2 days break and keep going.
Yeah.
This is the new technology.
It's stuff that I don't know how long it's going to take to become norm or cheap enough to where, maybe we'll be retired and old men by then, but, it's stuff we're testing now, right?
We ran an experiment this year, and we have some sort of crazy nitrogen timings. One treatment is 3 nitrogen applications. The other one is 6. The other one is 9, and the other one is 12. Wow. So basically every week. So in the science, we need to do crazy things.
Correct.
We need to go beyond what people do. We need to explore the limits, how far we can push. This is where we're going to get answers like, will it benefit if we fertilize after R1? We will have data and more data.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
I think this is a big topic for research and innovation as well.
Right now, it seems like in the position we're in, where we're trying to advise people what to do, you have our joke is always, your corn doesn't know the commodity price, right? So like the agronomy is still agronomy, regardless of the Chicago Board of Trade. But the flip side is true when you're trying to advise a grower or trying to help think through these things. To your point, on paper, it makes a lot of sense. If you could feed that corn 12 times versus 6 times, you've reduced the likelihood it's going to move off target. The flip side is true. 5 of those applications may be delivered at a time when Mother Nature isn't cooperative, and that could be a very difficult spend. And then for a normal grower, there has to be a cost association with that application. So you just run into this compounding effect of I have to figure out how to do this within margin, right? And that becomes tremendously difficult. We joke that it's, normally we have these conversations in November and everybody's well rested, right? They're excited. And then it's like June and you're like, oh my God, what were we thinking when we came up with this plan? And so it's just, it's a challenging conversation. But Andrew, I really like this question that you have about consistency.
Yeah. So thinking about all your research, whether it's a new hybrid, old hybrid, and just looking at high yield corn, are there any consistencies you see in nitrogen uptake in high yield corn versus lower yield, average or low yielding corn?
The only consistent is the pattern. It's going to follow the same pattern. We're going to get the maximum N uptake around V6 to around V8 all the way to VT. We're going to get the maximum. So the pattern is the same. What is going to be different?
So you see a lot of nitrogen getting taken up in that prime period.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, is going during that. What is the big difference? The biggest is the rate, how much they can take up. 5 pounds versus 7 pounds. So it's this thing, is the absolute value went up.
So the daily rate during those prime uptakes, that's how you reach maximum yield.
It is during that time and how you continue during reproductive growth. So during reproductive growth, you don't get the 5 pounds of nitrogen per acre per day. You get 1, 1.5, 2 when you are close to the silking, but you keep having those.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating concept. I remember listening to Dr. Bilo speak, and he was talking about in 300 bushel corn between V8 and R1, there'll be a 20 or 21 day period where that corn will want 10 pounds of nitrogen a day. Yep. And I mean, that blew my brain out of the side of my head, because I think if you said that to an average farmer, right, like somebody who doesn't really understand plant physiology or doesn't understand that, you'd start thinking very differently about timing of application, rate of application, proximity to the plant. I mean, all the variability. So if truly 300 bushels is not like a crazy goal anymore, right? I mean, we see 300 on the monitor all the time, maybe not whole field averages, but it's not uncommon. So you think about a portion of your field needs that volume of nitrogen, not applied, but available,
Yeah.
that's got to challenge your thinking about delivery.
Especially in a year like 2026, where you're trying to reach maximum and feed that plant its maximum uptake per day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And here is the challenge we face. It's going to get 10 pounds per day. It's going to get 1 pound per day. And when we think about the soil supply, the mineralization from the soil organic carbon, it will never go to these numbers. It's going to stay 1, maximum 2, and it's going to be really smooth up and then really smooth down following the temperature. So this is the other challenge we have.
And that's, you're talking about mineralization alone.
One thing that I'm thinking about in my mind from a visualization tool that I think would be helpful for growers is we've all seen like the nitrogen uptake curve, right? And it shows that. I think it'd be fun to build that the opposite way and say, okay, so here's a V10 plant and it wants 10 pounds today and 10 pounds tomorrow. And like, so I think if you think about it in the inverse of what we've all been taught, it would start to challenge your thought process of, okay, is my application method the best given my soil type, given my drainage? I mean, all the factors you're talking about, but I wonder if we'd almost flip it around and talk about it the other way. Andrew, if your yield goal is 300 bushels, you have, on average, you've got to have parts of your field making 350 or 370. In those parts of the field, you have to have 10 to 12 or 13 pounds available on a daily basis for 20 some days in a row. That feels almost shocking, right? To just think about that.
It will make everybody think differently.
And it can't be available over here if the roots are right here, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because then I only have access to a portion of it. So it just, to me, that starts to frame in.
It gets so muddy and tricky, but I think that's a phenomenal point.
Yeah.
I fully agree. I really like your idea. It's the way of thinking. Sometimes we see the total number, but this total number is not equal.
Yeah.
It's these 20 days that you must not limit corn with nitrogen.
Yeah.
Fully agree.
Yeah. Now that's really cool. I think I see when I talk about nutrient uptake curves and you start the daily requirements, you can see people kind of just like, it gets them thinking. And it gets even more complicated. You start throwing in nutrients like phosphorus, where we have high phosphorus uptake during the late reproductive stages. And when it just gets really complicated quick. But it's fascinating when you start thinking about our daily needs and that uptake.
This is a fun question, Sotirios. If you're standing in a field of corn, what's more telling to you for high yields? A bigger, thicker stalk or larger, wider leaves?
Let me ask you a quick question. When at what corn stage?
Yeah, so let's say late vegetative.
Late vegetative. I will go after the leaves.
Go after the leaves.
I like the leaves a lot.
Okay.
I like the leaves a lot. I want to see them green.
You like nice, big, wide leaves. Or explain that.
The color is the number one. That I'm gonna dark green color. This is the best indication how much nitrogen it carries over. And that will be my first one. And then I'm gonna pay attention to how uniform is the plant stance, how nicely spaced, and whether all the plants are at the same plant growth stage. That's the two things that I will pay the most of attention.
How does that change if Sean would have said R2, R3?
Oh, that is going to change a lot because my priority will be to touch the ear and have a sense of the size there and how many kernels are we talking about.
Well, if you're out there looking at a plot and you can't touch the ear if you're just looking at stalks or leaves.
I will look the size of the ear.
Or just doing it anyway.
So the closer you go to the ear, the better sense you're going to.
So I guess with that, we can take, if you're walking a plot and we'll say it's a week before tassel, a better indicator for you on yield is leaf greenness and leaf size versus stalk.
And that goes back to what you talked about, right? Is that the stalk, the goal of the stalk is to protect the integrity of the plant and nothing more. So additional stalk is not a direct correlation to yield, whereas the ability to convert nutrients from the leaves to the ear is a direct correlation to yield potential.
Exactly. We need the leaves to take the CO2. That's how we are going to build yield. And we need the stocks. We need the ear to place it somewhere, and we need the transport mechanism for water and nutrients.
So with that, I guess thinking about this, if I'm a grower that likes to plant 37, drop 37,000 seeds, so I have a final stand of 35, versus someone that maybe is looking at 32,000, you can have bigger leaves with those lower populations, but you don't have as many. How do you think about that?
So it's a balance. It's a population by nitrogen and how much water you have in the soil and what is your soil type, etc. If you put too many plants in a low productive field, you are going to get the opposite results. You are going to create so much stress for the plant that you don't want it. So it's a kind of a balance there. And before you walk in, and it's good to have a sense of what is the environment that you're working in, right?
I like the question that Andrew wrote here, and it's one that I think I feel like we've had experiences where you realize sometimes yield comes from the top end, and sometimes yield comes through stabilization. And so Andrew's question is, how can we use the results of the research that you've done to not only increase yields, but also be consistent year over year?
Yeah. The main take message from our research is that the corn plant looks the same, but it's not the same. Things are changing. So we should not be static in agriculture. We should not do something that we used to do for many years. We need to keep innovating and adapting to many new conditions. Like we measure in our study and in other studies, crop nitrogen uptake is going up. We measure the optimum nitrogen fertilizer rate for corn is going up. So we need to adapt to these new trends and higher yield. We need to support the plan.
I don't know if you guys have a sound effect you can play, but that would be the time to, I don't know if there's like a applause or a mic drop. I don't think we're allowed to drop these mics. I have thought about that so many times, that the delta between, you look at what the high yield guys are doing.
700 bushel corn.
And there's this attitude. I see it all the time when we talk about them. And Andrew and I have gotten the opportunity to interact with a lot of these guys. Several of them have been on the podcast. There's always this attitude like they're doing some crazy thing that we're not capable of. And the thing that is interesting to me is like, it's like the top end keeps going like this. And a lot of us are doing almost the same thing we were doing in some instances 30 years ago, right? Like we've barely changed practices from 30 years ago. And I've also had this thought, if you look at the industry, whether it's academia or like truly the commercial industry, I mean, millions and millions and billions of dollars going into research and being creative and trying new things. And the vast majority of us do the exact same thing on our farm every single year. And then if Mother Nature is super cooperative, we high five each other and think we're really onto something. And then we get the year where it's challenged. And it's like, well, we're not changing based on.
We're not doing anything to weather the storm and get consistent yields versus just relying on Mother Nature.
And when I say that, I have complete respect for the fact that it's really difficult to make these choices in the economic times. So some of the ideas are very expensive to do that change practice and stuff, but that could be the whole podcast there. What you just said right there, I just think is so critical. We have to respond to the fact that we are being given radically different tools today in corn hybrids than we were a decade ago and certainly 20 and 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So let's ask that question. I haven't read far enough ahead in the script, but given that information, okay, what would you tell the average grower today, the first 2 or 3 things you would think about? And let's primarily stay in the lane of nitrogen, but you can go wherever you want with that. What's the 2 or 3 things you'd consider as you're being given significantly better hybrids today than 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago? What would you evaluate it on a farm?
The hybrids, or what they should do, the farmer?
What they should do to take advantage of the yield potential.
First of all, I will start with planting. planting the crop. It has to be perfect condition, give it a great start. Now, when it comes to resources, I mean materials like nitrogen or other nutrients, to keep adding slowly a little bit every second year or so, to keep up with the trends. Genetic gain, the rate of increase, is going up. We see that in USDA reports, we see that in ERA studies, we see that in publications. Not everyone agrees on these numbers, but it's going up. As long as this is going up, we need to keep doing more. Fertility is the number one, plant density is the number two, but we should not think that independent because one affects the other one.
Yeah.
So we really need to factor these two together. Now, I will not go deeper into timing of application, etc., because there are so many factors and risk levels involved. So it's right choice of hybrid based on trials, results, and then adjusting fertility and plant population.
I'll add to that, but we do know, just based on our previous conversation, that your research, Tony Vine's research, we know we need more nitrogen later in the growing season. So it's up to us to kind of figure out what that looks like on your farm. You know what I mean? And on a year like 2026, I say there's a lot of risk putting all your nitrogen out in the fall.
I fully agree with that, Andrew. And I will tell you this about reproductive period. At that time, corn is really strong. It has a 5 feet, 4 feet rooting depth, and it can take the nitrogen from many different points within the soil profile as compared to earlier in the system. So pushing a little bit the timing is going to help, but as long as there is nitrogen in the soil profile, I'm telling you, corn plant is going to take it.
Yeah.
It's pretty good in taking up nitrogen and water.
So if you were going to apply nitrogen only once, so your perfect scenario is give the plant exactly what it needs when it needs it, and only when it needs it. Easy enough, right? But if you were only going to apply nitrogen once, what form and what time?
In Central Iowa, right? Because this is conditional to where we are, right?
Yeah,
okay. I will put it 2 to 3 weeks before planting. One time, right? So I will put it 2 to 3 weeks before planting. And let me elaborate a little bit on that. I expect from the time of application until planting is going to be some rain events, and hopefully are not going to be crazy high rainstorms to push all the nitrogen down. What I'm thinking and why I say that, it is always good, very good to have nitrogen a little bit below the topsoil. In the topsoil, you have soil organic matter contribution. In the subsoil, you don't have. But what you have in the subsoil throughout the growing season is moisture. In the topsoil, you are not going to have moisture every single day during the growing season.
Yeah.
So when the plant needs nitrogen, it may not take it from the top, it's going to go deeper and take it. So it's good to have some nitrogen there. You don't want to have all of your nitrogen there because it's going to get out of the root zone. So that will be my best guess.
Can I ask a question circling back to your comment about population and then fertility? Mm-hmm. So do you have is it as simple as saying if I'm going to increase my population by 10%, I need to increase my fertility by 10%? Or is that an oversimplification? How would you think about that as you increase density? How do you factor in your fertilizer needs?
Directionally, you are right. Increasing one, you have to increase the other one, but it's not one-to-one relation. Okay. It's a little bit more complicated. We have done some publications on that one, and I'm pretty sure there are more studies out there when it comes to density by nitrogen, fertilizer rate, and hybrids. That will be nice to summarize it in a nice graph and get it out in an extension article so people can use it easily. Great point.
We've seen it before where we've increased plant density, and sometimes it's because we're told a hybrid might be more responsive, or we're chasing a higher yield. But it's often, to me, it's like that's the only change we make.
Yeah.
And so I sit there and go, well, if you haven't changed the amount to fill the sink, changing the amount of sinks doesn't inherently guarantee.
Then you're just leaving it up to Mother Nature.
Yeah. And then it doesn't necessarily feel all that different than what we were doing in the first place. So sometimes it feels like we do that, and then we don't necessarily see a yield increase, and we think it was a failure, and it might not be. It might have way more to do with nutritional conversion.
Absolutely. And I want to build on that. Sometimes we don't see yield benefit, but we should be more persistent on that. 1 year may not be enough to draw conclusions. We may have to deal with a particular year. We really need to test this more than 1, 2, and 3 years, and in many different situations. And the practice may work, but we may forget to add something else to see the impact on the yield. So sometimes it's good to make some checkpoints mid-season and say, okay, I put my population, it's greener, thicker, seems like good. We achieve halfway. We need to figure out the other halfway, how to see the true impact on the yield.
Your comment reminded me of what I want my shirt to be. So we've had a number of professors on here that have made statements that are just so impactful that, or funny. We want to make shirts out of. Fred Belo's a photon that hits the ground is a photon forever wasted. Megan Anderson's recreational tillage. I want mine to be, don't leave it up to Mother Nature. Because we have all these things that we do, and kind of to your point, we have so much potential, and yet many people do the same thing over and leave it up to Mother Nature if they have a good year or bad year. And I'm sitting here looking at 2026, and whether we're deficient in nitrogen or whether we continue to get high mineralization rates, at some point, if that rain shuts off, we're going to be banking on synthetic nitrogen, right? And so that's where we've been lucky up to this point because we've had such high mineralization rates, we haven't had to experience that. But there's so many times on a normal year even where we get heavy spring rains, we're banking on what we do, and we can't leave it up to Mother Nature if we want to have consistent yields year over year. Does that make sense?
It does absolutely sense. And this goes back to my earlier comment about I would like to have some nitrogen in the subsoil. And this is my insurance for what you just said, Andrew. It doesn't rain for 3 weeks during grain filling period or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
At least I know there is some source of nitrogen for the roots to take up.
Yeah.
When we have gotten the opportunity to spend time with Ignacio Ciampiti, now at Purdue, we kind of asked him what his, I don't mean perfect nitrogen recommendation, because obviously that's an impossible question to answer. But if you said across generally the I states, right, like Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, if you were to say, here's how I would think philosophically about nitrogen, I know his answer is 50% up front, 50% in season, adjust the 50% in season based on, the economics, the ability, right? I mean, all those variables. Would you encourage people to think about split application? And if so, how many times? Kind of how does that work in your head based on your research?
I will encourage the farmers and everyone to check the soil before they apply. You never know how much you may have there. You may be surprised. You may have way more than you need. You may have too little or nothing. So before I will do a decision, I need to know how much I have in the soil. So I will check, and I think this is something that we need to use more and more in agriculture.
I think it'll get easier too as technology.
That's what I want to know. What does that mean?
Get how much inorganic nitrogen you have in the soil. Is this in the fall? Is this in the spring? In the spring, there are some tools like LS&T. You plug in your value, you get how much to apply. It's helpful. And believe me, these tools are going to get way better.
Yeah. So when you say check, are you saying walk out in my field, probe my field at 6 or 12 inches, send it to a lab, get back my available nitrogen reading? And what from a practical standpoint, if I farm 1,000 acres of corn, how many of those am I taking? I mean,
absolutely.
I want the result of this for people to be able to make a different decision next year. So if I've got 1,000 acres of corn, what am I doing?
How many soil cores do you get for basic fertility schedule? I will say keep your schedule, don't change your operation and what you do a lot, just add one more measurement. And this measurement can tell you a lot. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say you do a soil sampling in the fall and you have there 150 pounds of nitrogen in your soil profile. It's like you applied anhydrous ammonia. You have it there. You have it there. So in that case, you don't apply any. You go later on and you apply close to planting or V6 stage. So I will start with that. Now, the technical issues, how many samples, when, etc., I believe we will get to that point and recommendations and suggestions and everything, how to do it, how often these are going to get to the light soon. But that will be, to me, a starting point. And then timing, the splitting that Ignacio said, half and half, this is a really good suggestion. I think this is how we're going to make progress in agriculture. Not making a decision at 200, 250, 220. Let's see how much we have before we put more.
I don't know a single grower that has done that.
Things may change. And
I think similar to that, you got all this variable rate, and I feel like we're going backwards with variable rate applications, and we're just spending money putting stuff out there.
Is that a byproduct of capacity? Is that, I mean, do you think that's a byproduct, or as an industry, have we tried to just become so efficient that we don't have the capacity to do it the right way? Why don't we do that? It boggles my mind that we spread a flat rate of nitrogen when I mean, the easiest math in the world is if I look at my yield map, I know I took more nitrogen out of part of the field than I did another. That's not complicated. But then we go out and we put the exact same amount of nitrogen
across the
on every
entire
acre.
field.
I mean, it's
and you got spots doing 275, you got spots doing 175.
Yeah. And we go spread the exact same amount of nitrogen on this. We don't have to get into this. It could turn into a rant, but I question why is the system built that way? And I don't know if it's just because generally it works, right? I mean, trendline yields go up. We're more efficient than we used to be. We're producing too much corn. But it just kind of boggles my mind that we don't do that. I don't get to say my key takeaways at the end of the show. That's not. I just get made fun of at the beginning of the first episode. But one of them would be we really need to get granular about nitrogen, right? We should be asking very simple questions about how much is there and how much more do I need. And
that's good.
Sorry, hold on for a second. You can decide if we leave this in the show or not. We're having a great debate about water quality, right? Mm-hmm. We're having a great debate about nitrate in the water. I don't know if when I apply nitrogen in the fall, I'm over or under my CEC. I know what my CEC is, assuming zero. Assuming I'm starting at zero, I know my soil's ability to hold that nitrogen. I don't know if I'm starting with 20 pounds or 150 pounds. If I go out and add another 150 pounds, I could be blowing my CEC out of the water.
Exactly. It's like you want to go to Chicago from Ames and you don't know how much you have in the car, but no matter what, you are going to stop in the gas station and you are going to put it in.
Right. But in that example,
that's really good.
But in that example, as soon as I see the gas start spilling out, I'm going to shut it off.
Yeah, but nitrogen, you cannot see it.
Cannot see it.
That's a really good point. How do we?
I don't even know where we're at on here. So
I'm just thinking about nitrogen content within our residue, because residue is such a huge conversation. I mean, I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges we face moving forward. What have you learned in your looking at old hybrids versus new hybrids in terms of nitrogen content in that residue, and how does that impact the breakdown of that residue?
Great point. we see two things. The first one, change in the partitioning in the stover towards more leaves and
More nitrogen in
less
the leaves.
amount, dry matter.
Okay.
More dry matter. So you have 10 tons of stover, you are going to have way more leaves and less stems. So there is a change in the amount, which is a good thing.
That's a good thing.
That's a really good thing. Now, let me tell you the bad thing. In both situations, what we leave behind, the concentration, is smaller than what it used to be in the old hybrids. So the CN ratio is a little bit higher, but we didn't measure statistically significant differences. There was a trend. The other trend with the changed leaf stems, that was significant. So these are the two trends that we see, old and new.
Yeah. And that impacts, if I'm a grower and I'm wanting to know how that impacts my residue breakdown.
That's a great point, because usually leaves have a significantly lower CN ratio, so they are going to decompose within weeks pretty fast. Stem is going to stay a little bit longer, and cobs is going to stay way longer.
Really? That's
Because of the density.
yeah.
Yeah, it's sitting there. The CN ratio is pretty high.
What is the C to N ratio in a cob?
It's over 100.
Because I was saying, I know like corn in general, what, 57 to 1 roughly?
Yeah, it's leaves are about 40, stems around 80, 90, and cobs can be over 120, 110.
Wow. So if you have a lot of plants out there and a lot of ears, you have more cobs.
Exactly.
So that can really impact your carbon to nitrogen ratio.
Exactly. The good news is that cobs is a small portion in the whole stover, but still you have a low quality piece over there.
That's very interesting. So thinking about, as I wrap up, where do you see the future of corn breeding?
Breeders have done an exceptional job. They have not get as much credit as they deserve to get, in my opinion. And I like the scale that they select new hybrids. And I think the future is going to continue like this, probably more automation I see there. I believe that breeders are going to continue to innovate and produce products more productive and with higher efficiencies. Not only nitrogen, neither water, but everything. Everything.
All the macros and micros.
Everything. And that is going to be a combination also with management, because breeding can go up to a certain point, but when you change, as we discussed before, Sean, breeding and density and nitrogen together, there is where you raise the potential really high.
I really like that.
I heard a number that I'm not going to say at an event last year, but thinking about the concept of, the marriage of technology and breeding and the combination of the work that you're doing and kind of this whole thing coming together. And we see the technology curve oftentimes, the hockey stick, right? So if I had to ask you today, let's just say in our lifetime, our collective lifetime, what do you think the upper limit for commercial corn is?
It's way high. The theoretical is way, way high. We will never reach that one. But what was the corn yield 50 years ago?
Boy.
Well, you said 1.77 bushels increase average per year for 40 years. So that's 70 bushel. So 100, a little over 100?
Yeah.
110?
I think in our lifetime, yields are going to nearly double.
Really?
So
going back from...
Go back in time, it double.
Yeah.
And we have the linear trend.
Do you think we'll ever see 1,000 bushel corn yield?
I don't know, maybe in a movie or...
The thing that's interesting about that, though, so think about that from a double standpoint. I mean, we've seen 300 become possible on a commercial scale.
Exactly.
And we have 600 bushel corn today through these guys that are pushing the upper limits. Well, if you believe we could double, 1,000 bushel corn isn't out of the question, right? I mean, if commercially in 25 years we're growing 500-600 bushel corn commercially,
that means
I don't know. I don't know if that means we're closing the gap on the top or not, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like breeders are far outpacing.
The potential is here. We have this capacity. What I'm worried, the worst case scenario, to have a disruption either in breeding or supply chain, etc. Like we have the potential, but we cannot achieve it because we don't have the inputs. So if fertilizer prices go up or the rain gets more extreme and we are not able to grow corn as we want, then we may not reach that one.
Yeah, I guess I haven't ever really thought about that the yield limiting factor may soon become not genetic potential.
Yeah.
That's a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
I had that thought when we experienced that 12 and a half, almost 13 inches of rain in 36 hours. That took away every bit of technology, every bit of precision, every bit of agronomics. There's nothing we could have done in that environment. And it seems like we're experiencing more and more of that variability.
That variability is going to be the big challenge we have to deal with. And how do we inform people about what is coming? We really need to go into early warning systems.
We do two things at the end of our show.
Okay, very good.
And we'll start with you. First of all, a ton of gratitude because we have probably not even a comprehensive understanding of the volume of work that it takes to do this research to provide us this feedback, but just unbelievably grateful for you and everyone else participating in this.
I second that.
Thank you.
Part of what we want to do with this show is highlight people like yourself that are doing this incredible work. So we asked you an opening question. We'll ask you a closing question. As you think about your career to date, what is the thing that you are either most proud of or have been most encouraged by, or the thing that you really feel is like kind of the thing that defines your research so far?
That was something that we built up in year 2015 at Iowa State University. It was a few years after I got hired. And we created a team within Agronomy, me, Castellano, Licht, and lots of students. And we apply modeling, crop modeling, for the very first time. And we try to predict soil nitrogen dynamics, crop yield, evapotranspiration, nitrogen uptake over time. And we did that in real time. We were updating the information every week. At the same time, we had students going to the field and collecting data, and everything was going to the website. So we had the modeling and we had the experimental data, everything up there live. So that it was a big learning and something that I'm very proud that we accomplished. We maintained that for 5 years and we learned a lot. And the most important, we demonstrated the power of technology and experimentation together to learn a little bit ahead of the curve and to get some valuable answers. Why we got this yield, or why we don't have nitrogen, or what if I should have done better. So that was something we did it very early, 2015 to 2019. We kept that for a couple of years. That was probably one of the best projects that I'm very proud. Collaboration, students' involvement, it was something new at that time. Fantastic.
I've only recently kind of been able to kind of frame in this idea for myself. But when you talk about that, the thing that's so cool to me is progress stops when curiosity stops, right? And so curiosity met with passion is how we innovate and continue to change things. And so just truly on behalf of Andrew and I and a penny for your thoughts, thank you for your curiosity, but also your diligence to work as hard as you and your teams have done, because it's pretty incredible, and it obviously informs a pretty significant algorithm for us to make decisions by. So Andrew, your turn. penny for your thoughts.
All right, we got to cash in. These are my key takeaways. I'm trying to learn as we go and maybe summarize some of what you've learned. So if at any point I get something wrong, step in and correct me. My first key takeaway and something I learned from you, it's interesting to hear you talk about these old and new hybrids. Talking about the nitrogen content in the leaves versus the stalk. And when you look at high yield corn, you see high nitrogen content in the leaves and low nitrogen content in the stalk. And I think that's something that just kind of stands out. Kind of tied to that, if you're walking a plot and you're looking for high yielding corn, you're looking for big leaves. Obviously, if the ear's not out there, you're looking for big green leaves. And that's really a good indicator of, obviously, we're trying to capture carbon, right, and convert that into sugars and, stuff like that. So, just thinking about the impact of nitrogen content in those leaves, that's really something you look for, just big leaves and the nitrogen content. The other thing that stood out is, you mentioned the yield equation, harvest index times biomass. Mm-hmm. And when I thought of that, I thought of all these different, and this kind of ties into something I'm going to ask Sean, but that yield equation, we get biomass by giving the plant the nutrients it needs when it needs it, right? That rapid vegetative growth. And so I'm just thinking about 2026 and some of my key takeaways. We don't get big, unless we're lucky and we have high mineralization rates. On a year-over-year basis, if we're trying to accumulate the most biomass, which is part of that yield equation, we do that by giving the plant the nutrients it needs when it needs it. And I'm just sitting here thinking about nutrient uptake curves and how can we be more efficient with what we're doing. And I think that's something that, as we get into some of these other ones, adapt and get granular, I think that's a big part of it. Because I'm sitting here thinking about 2026 and the nitrogen we lost, the boron we've lost, these other nutrients, depending on your pH, and just all these things kind of come together. And I'm just thinking about biomass, right? And so that's something that really stood out to me, that yield equation, harvest index by biomass. The fourth one is, I really like when you said it is going to be our marketing team will use this. You said adapt, right? And we've learned so much about these newer hybrids compared to these older hybrids. And we continue to have more yield potential in all these products that all these companies are bringing out. And to continue to match the yield potential in what we're actually pulling out of the field, we as agronomists, as growers, need to adapt our management practices to match that. And one of the biggest things you learned, and you said it mirrors what Tony Vine found, we need more nitrogen later in the growing season. So again, going back to 2025, 2026, we have a year like this. What are we doing as growers, as agronomists, to ensure that our corn plants have nitrogen later into the reproductive stages? And I'm just sitting here looking at 2026. I don't think we do that by putting all of our nitrogen on in the fall, simply put. And this last one, I wanted to let Sean get some.
He's supposed to have 3, by the way. So
I wanted to have Sean to get some of the spotlight because I really liked that. I think that was a pretty impactful. I feel like you need a Snickers bar. He was getting a little hangry.
Got a little upset.
But it was such a valid statement. I think that's something that we need to have as a summary. So talk about that. You said get granular. We have all these different yields coming out of spots in the field. We have, you talked about actually understanding and knowing how much nitrogen we have in the fall. And you made that comment, get granular. So talk to me about that and tell me your key takeaway with that.
Yeah, I think that from an advisor standpoint right now, I have this tension of, right now we're on razor thin margins, right? I mean, and if you go stand in a Casey's or have coffee or read a farm journal, the big topic of conversation is, can I be profitable next year? And I when you were saying there could be 150 pounds of nitrogen in the soil, and let's just say on average we're paying 50 cents a pound for our nitrogen, right? And we already know we're not capturing all of that. So we know even in the best case scenario, we're not efficient with that investment. And then we're going to make an investment that could be, $75 or $80 an acre without applying any logic to, do I even need this, right? And we're doing that because we've always done it. And in general, it's worked. And so I think when I think about the idea of we have a responsibility, one, to be good stewards of the land, two, good stewards of our fertility. To your point, that could be a limiting factor someday, right? Whether we have access to enough fit. Just like, my goodness, if I'm on razor thin margins, why would I spend $1 putting nutrition in my field if I don't know whether or not I need it, right? And my guess is the answer is probably not, I don't need any anywhere, right? That's probably a pretty rare day. My assumption is I'm putting a lot out there that I don't need all of. And so it seems like if really as a grower, my concern is my balance sheet, one of the easiest and most inexpensive ways to query that would be to start with that equation. And two things could happen. I could save a bunch of money, or I could reallocate those dollars to the appropriate places. And in either one of those equations, I think I'm far ahead.
Yeah.
And that, to me, probably the reason I'm actually not that hungry, but I think the reason that like kind of causes this reaction is because like that's low hanging fruit.
Yep.
You're not asking me to learn something I don't understand today. You're saying go stick a pipe in the ground, pull it out, and ask it's what's there, and then make decisions based on that. And I both on a granular level and philosophically, that doesn't seem complex to me. But nobody in the industry is talking about it or pushing for that, and that just seems like such low hanging fruit.
I think that's the best key takeaway that we've had. I think that's good. And then on top of that,
it only took me 103 episodes to acknowledge that I contribute to the output. So.
Building on that, though, you go into variable rate technology,
Yep.
and again, I feel like we're going backwards with this, and yet same idea, same concept. Where we have all this information, we have these maps where we can visually see yields, and we know how it's somewhat consistent. You'll get a little fluctuation, but we know how much nitrogen, phosphorus, all the other stuff leaves in the grain, right? So we can make maps based on that, and yet I feel like not a whole lot of people are using variable rate technology, right? So, no, this has been really good.
I'm gonna steal the ending. So at the ending of our show, we always give a teaser to what we're going to do next. And I'm actually really excited about what we're going to do next. So Andrew talked about earlier that we are going to dedicate some time to nitrogen. So after we get done with this, we're going to spend some time with a couple different professors, one from the state of Iowa and one from Illinois, and talk about some really exciting research, both around plant nutrition, but also water quality and how to make sure that our nitrogen's staying put. So really excited about what we're going to record coming up. But Sotirios, it just truly can't thank you enough for your time today, your expertise, the hard work. And Andrew, we started the science episode by saying it's pretty cool to be here. It's pretty cool to be here. So I appreciate that. Appreciate you and everything.
Thank you both. It was honored to be here and great discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
We enjoyed you. Appreciate it.
Perfect.
Thank you.